Looking for more archaeological skills? The Society for American Archaeology offers continuing education to help you learn and advance professionally. Most events are certified by the Register for Professional Archaeologists, which means attendees receive continuing professional education credits. Some upcoming topics include faunal analysis, ground-penetrating radar, indigenous perspectives, and ethical training. Visit saa.org/online seminars for more information.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm the president and founder of the California Rock Art Foundation. And what we do is we identify, evaluate, manage, and conserve rock art both in Alta California and in Baja California. We conduct field trips, we have trainings, exercise, we do research, and in every way possible, we try to preserve, protect, and coordinate treasures of Alta and Baja California rock art, of which there are many and diverse. We also work closely with Native Americans and partner with them to recognize and protect sacred sites. So for more info about the fabulous California Rock Art Foundation, you can go to carockart.org. Also, I'm open to give me a call, 805-312-2261. We would welcome sponsorship or underwriting, helping us to defray the costs of our podcasts, and also membership in California Rock Art Foundation. And of course, donations, since we are a 501c3 nonprofit scientific and educational corporation. God bless everyone out there in podcast land.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Hello out there, this is Dr. Alan Garfinkel, your moderator for the 135th episode of the Rock Art Podcast. We have Hamish Findlay, who's a historical craftsman and experimental archaeologist from Scotland, talking about Pictish stones. Wait till you hear this one, gang. What a joy and what a wonder. Catch you on the flip-flop. Hello out there in Rock Art Podcast land. This is your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel. And continuing our efforts far afield and globally, thanks to Ashley, who's been able to cultivate some new and exciting guest scholars. And we have Hamish Findlay, who's a historical craftsman and experimental archaeologist, as he calls himself. And we're going to hear a bit about his expertise, his knowledge, and some of the areas of symbolism that come out of Scotland. Are you there, Hamish?
I am indeed. I'm very honored to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
Well, no, we're honored to have you. I think this is the first time we've had anybody from your esteemed country. And I guess tell me a bit about your background and how you got involved with this and how we might think about your expertise and how it relates to the big element of rock art and maybe indigenous people throughout the globe.
For sure. Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm really honored to bring sort of my knowledge and journey of Scottish or ancient Pictish history to the fore. Yeah, I kind of wear many hats, and at the forefront of everything I do is about sharing, exploring Pictish culture from Scotland, which is the sort of as indigenous as we can get to the northeast of Scotland. So, sort of,
what does Pictish mean? Pictish? Is that a language? Is that a archaeological culture? What does that concept relate to?
The Picts were the kind of indigenous people of northeast Scotland. They're kind of began in the Iron Age and became a real polity in the early medieval period. And it's what a lot of Scottish ancestry goes back to.
Were they agriculturalists at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. They were, yeah.
And that goes back to what age? What would you put it, like an AD or BC?
So the Pictish culture starts to come about during about the kind of 2nd century AD, so around 200s, but really forms a polity in the between the 6th and the 9th century AD.
I see.
Yeah.
And what remains from that culture that tugs at your heartstrings?
The biggest remnant, and you'll love this, would be the rock carvings all across Pict land.
Really?
That's kind of really what first sparked my passion for it.
Uh-huh.
I'm from the northeast of Scotland, in Aberdeenshire, and as a bairn I grew up playing on Pictish stones. They're everywhere in Scotland. There's hundreds of them.
Uh-huh.
Very detailed carvings of a very unique culture. Some of the carvings, you'll find these symbols nowhere else in the world. So there's something really kind of enigmatic about these carvings and about this culture, and a lot of mystery surrounding it as well. So it's a big part of exploring Pictish history is kind of exploring these mysteries and trying to bring some of them to light. So it's...
How big an area does the Pictish culture and the Pictish rock art ensconce? How many miles or how much?
Roughly half of Scotland.
Half of Scotland.
Yeah.
Wow, that's huge, right?
Yeah, you kind of had the Picts in the east and the Scots in the west. They were two distinct cultures.
And tell me a bit about how you got involved in this and how this, how you wrapped your mind around this. It sounds like you were interested in this from when you were a child.
Yeah, so it's kind of growing up in the northeast. You can't not be surrounded by Pictish history and culture. And I think just as I grew older and developed more interests in history, it kind of led me down this rabbit hole. First and foremost, a craftsman, particularly a leather craftsman. I've always been in love with leather and leather items, and reading a lot of historical books as a kid. You hear about leatherwork. So that's what first led me in. And it's spending more time in museums looking at historical leatherwork led me more down this historical path. I actually started by making a lot of Viking things, living in Norway and spending a lot of time there. And then it kind of led me to, find more kind of interest in my own culture and start exploring that more. And then that has led me on this strange journey into academic circles. So I kind of work within archaeology. I do experimental projects. I work as a historical consultant for TV, movies, and books. I've given lectures at universities to archaeology students. And I'm now also a tattoo artist, so it kind of lends into archaeological research of tattooing and exploring cultures through that. But it's all come as a craftsman. Everything I do is first and foremost as a craftsman. And it's to kind of pick apart our past, and it's always comes back to Pictish culture because it's a culture that not many people understand, even within Scotland.
So tell us a little bit about the subject matter and the various theories that have been foisted about, on what kinds of stones do these appear, and are they intricate and well preserved? Is there, independent of the rock art, other ethnographic or historical information to glean?
So when we first encounter the Picts, we're talking around the turn of the millennium, when we have a collection of loose, what we'd call, early Celtic Iron Age tribes throughout Scotland. And we see a Roman incursion into Scotland, and this lasts several centuries. And up until this point, there's no evidence of stone carvings. And it seems that the Romans would have brought stonemasonry and stone carvings with them. And through Roman oppression, these Celtic tribes start to amalgamate into a more solid polity. And it's the Romans that give them the name, the Picti, which potentially could mean the painted people. And there's mentions of tattoos and things, which I can get into later. But it seems that this is when we start to see the birth of Pictish stone carvings with very unique symbols, almost like a response to Roman oppression. Romans are erecting stone carvings and showing this culture. So the local tribes then realize they have to put their own culture into a pictorial format on the landscape to really stamp their grounds. And we see these beautiful early rock carvings. They're just peck marked in at this stage, just incised, but we see beautiful images of all sorts of animals and these very enigmatic symbols that I can go into. But for example, one we call the double disc and Z rod. So it's kind of like two circles joined together, and this rod in the form of a Z that threads its way through them. There's many, many different depictions of this. There's also a crescent V rod. So it's kind of like a crescent moon with a rod in the shape of a V running through it. So these are completely unique to the Picts. And we get all sorts of symbols all around Scotland, some that we just still to this day can't explain what they are or what they possibly mean. But they spring up around Pictland, hundreds and hundreds of them. And as the Romans carry on their kind of oppression, the Picts consolidate further and further, become a stronger polity. And then in the year 410, the Romans withdrew from the UK. The kind of boot of oppression was removed from the local people's necks. And what we have here is, in the 5th century, is this beautiful age of all these cultures springing up, and the art flourishes, the craft flourishes, and their borders go up, and their culture and identity really flourishes. And that's what we find in Scotland. The Picts in the East really found this polity. They really came into their own. Their art developed into this very unique style. And it's reflected in the stone carvings. They become a lot more intricate, a lot more symbols come to the fore. And we also now have a writing system introduced as well, which kind of came from Ireland, but was developed, adopted by the Picts. And we start seeing a really unique, just beautiful array of stones across this region.
In that writing system, do they have much relevancy to the rock art vis-a-vis explaining the symbols or giving hints of why they're so ubiquitous and beautiful?
If only we were that lucky, to be honest.
Exactly. I knew the answer, but
yeah,
ask a question anyways.
Yeah, the writing system's called Ogham. It's often said as Ogham, that stems from Ireland, and it's we have a stem line, one solid line that's carved in, and there is a collection of kind of dashes across the line, or to one side, or diagonally across it, and they're often just names depicting sons and fathers. Sometimes you might get something a bit more depicting an event. There's a lot more in Ireland that are more decipherable. There's just under 40 inscriptions in Scotland, and only about half of them are eligible.
Wow.
It's a whole study in itself, but it's beautiful to see this system. It's a really beautiful language and way of writing, and it's phonetic as well. So we can see the same names, but written differently in different regions of Pictland, just from the phonetics of it. So it's quite an interesting study.
Are there descendants of Picts, people that genetically are related, or do we know that?
Yeah, half of Scotland will be descendants.
Half of Scotland.
The Picts didn't go anywhere. This is this big question. We had the Picts in the east and the Scots in the west. What we have in Pictish culture is a unique form of leadership, in that it was a matrilinear system.
Okay.
So Pictish kings usually did not have Pictish fathers. When a king died, they chose the suitor from the female line. And this, when we had lots of petty kingdoms within Pictland, it meant a lot of the tribal chieftains were cousins or brothers. And what we had at one point was the Picts and the Scots during the kind of 8th and 9th century were uniting to fight off incursions of Norsemen from Scandinavia. And in one of these battles, the Scottish king was killed and the Pictish king was killed. And arose a Scottish king in the west called Kenneth MacAlpin, who had a Pictish mother. And so the Picts also accepted him as their overking. So we have both kingdoms under one kingship. And slowly, because his royal court were Scots speaking Gaelic, we just see the Pictish culture slowly become amalgamated into Scottish culture. And Pictland slowly became Alapa, which is now the Kingdom of Scotland. So the people, the Picts, never went anywhere. Just they started speaking a different language and adopting Western culture from Scotland.
Now, you said there's many, many hundreds of examples of this Pictish rock art, and it's absolutely exquisite. What is the stone that these images are fashioned on? What kind of stone canvas?
So I'm not a stone carving expert, but there is some granite, but it is mostly sandstone.
Mostly sandstone.
Yeah, there is some harder stones, there is some granite stones here and there, but yeah, some of it is transported quite a way. Some of these stone carvings are 6 meters tall, completely carved with battle scenes, with figures being beheaded and kings and princes and royal scenes of the lairds hunting deer with their hounds, huge embossed spiral panels, knotwork panels, tree of life, all sorts of creatures under the sun.
Wow.
These can be enormous stone carvings.
So, are these well preserved? I would presume that the weather and the circumstances have affected some of them, certainly, or are they able to weather the natural environment?
We've been finding them for centuries, so a lot of the time we find them because farmers have ploughed over them so many times they decide to finally get rid of them out of their field. So we get beautifully carved stones that have got plough marks all through them and they're damaged. But those that have survived intact in situ have survived quite well. But now the Historic Environment Scotland, for the past sort of 50 years, have been trying to preserve as many. So some of them that we like to keep in situ, during the winter we encase them in boxes to protect them. Some of them get encased in glass cases, but what tends to be the case now is we remove it from being in situ into a museum or a church, and then a full-scale replica is carved and replaced on the hill.
Oh, fascinating. Is there any pushback about that particular way of conserving these monuments? In other words, go ahead.
I think there is in a spiritual sense with it not being the real stone in place.
Yeah.
But nobody can really, say that it's not worth it, because some of these stones, you can see the degradation in 10 years sometimes on these stones.
Wow.
They go from well-carved stones to almost unrecognizable, and we just have so many modern factors to consider. I think, modern farming practices and all sorts, and various chemicals and all sorts that are really affecting the degradation of them. So the only way to really preserve them is to fully encase them in situ or get them into a protected area like a museum or church.
Like a church. Huh.
Yeah, and many of them are preserved in church. But as much as we can, we'll get them into museums.
Fascinating. So I guess we should cut it off there, and then we'll pick it up on the next segment.
Yeah.
I'm very, very much intrigued. See you in the flip-flop, gang. Welcome back, all you archaeology podcast lovers. This is your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel. And we are blessed and honored to have Hamish Findlay, an historical craftsman and experimental archaeologist, all the way from Scotland, talking about Pictish rock art. And this is something I know virtually nothing about, and I'm learning as we go. Needless to say, I'm fascinated with this, Hamish. Let's continue our story here. So you've got this data set at your fingertips. What are the most engaging and important questions one might ask in terms of trying to understand this data set?
Well, it's difficult to understand when it's standalone. The difficulty is there's not much remains from the Picts. There's not much written evidence, but there is some other evidence. This is the archaeological evidence of the Picts. And then there's manuscripts such as the famous Book of Kells, which is in Ireland but is not from Ireland. It was actually produced in Pictland by Pictish monks, which is a pretty big sweeping statement. But when you study the imagery of it as well, you'll see it very similar to the Pictish stone carvings. And what we're seeing is when we have the earlier Pictish carvings, we're seeing a lot of rudimentary carvings but unique symbols. And this is set in pagan context. This is all pre-Christian. Once the Romans leave, the Picts actually Christianized from the sort of 6th century onwards. And this is where a lot of the rock art changes as well. We get a lot more Christian stones, but they all still have the pagan imagery on them as well. So it's really kind of interesting to look at when this transition happened and how it happened and why. And it's really fascinating because with the church comes language, comes training, comes economics, and we start to see craft centres of Pictish art and craft, we see the monastery of Potmahammock up by the Black Isle suddenly producing manuscripts and all sorts. And we have Aberlemno in Angus that is suddenly a stone carving school. And we believe that with Christianization, they were bringing up Northumbrian stone carvers, potentially running kind of training centres there, producing these beautiful big Christian monuments that were full of pagan imagery. And these were then spreading throughout Pictland. So who was really ordering these stones? Because before the church, was it just chieftains? Was it sort of communities that we have going? And then the church kind of took hold of a lot of that. And was there still localized chieftains ordering stone carvings to themselves, in essence? Because we have a lot of stones with symbols and names and not real any idea why they're there or who put them there. So it always asks more questions.
Yeah, so you're saying that a lot of these monuments, even though it's going through a period of Christianization, are full of pagan symbolism. Did I catch that correctly or no?
Absolutely, yes. I think what's often happened with Christianization around the world is that the best way to show people you're not scary is to include their imagery and weave it into your own tales. I mean, that's just part of it. And I think it would have put people at ease quite a lot.
So you had this religious syncretism, as we use it in the term in anthropology. And tell me, a little bit about what sorts of pagan images they have that are twinned with classic Christian images. It's fascinating.
Well, we suddenly see a huge big Christian cross carving, but next to it will be all the pre-Christian symbols, the double disc Z-rod, the crescent V-rod. A lot of this imagery will be in there, and then it will be mixed in with a lot of the Christian tales of sort of King David and all sorts of these tales. I don't study Christianity, so all I really glean is what I see from the stone carvings. But it's
right.
Tales woven around the pre-Christian pagan symbols. They're all put into the same stories on the stones. Sadly, we're just not quite speaking the same language as the people back then. I'm sure it all made perfect sense.
Now, do they have any particular indexical animals that are favored during this time?
Absolutely. The Picts really favoured carving boar, bear, deer are on many, many stones.
Uh-huh.
So we see a lot of like these kind of animals that would have been in a lot of scenes, but then we do have, with the introduction of Christianity, a lot of almost looks like mythical creatures enter into the fore. There's a lot of Christian tales of, the sort of like chimera beasts and things. So we have a lot of animals, different heads to the bodies and things. That's introduced quite a lot.
Because I'm Catholic. Is Mary ever represented?
There is, to date, I will point out, we are on average finding one new Pictish stone every year. So to date, we only have one stone that has a definitive carving of a woman. Only one.
Oh my word.
And this is out of hundreds and hundreds of stones and fragments of stones. However, this one stone carving, it's the Hilton of Cadboll stone, and the woman is the most important person on the stone. It's not a religious figure. It definitely seems to be a royal figure. It seems to be some sort of a matriarch riding side saddle on a horse with trumpeteers behind her and her royal court and princes around her. And she is the most prominent figure on the stone. But it's the only carving we have of a woman, and it's not religious.
Fabulous. One would think that this was a rather androcentric culture with representations exclusively of male-related figures and male-related things. Yes or no?
Yeah, quite potentially. There's one quite strong theory about the symbols that relates, it seems, to men more than anything. The symbols are often found in pairings, so we usually call them a symbol pair.
Okay.
There is one stone at Dunfermline that has two figures at the top facing each other in thrones, and above each figure is a symbol pair. They each have a pair. And then beneath them, under a Christian cross, is a royal figure on a horse, and he has a symbol pair above him, and each of his symbols is one of those from the pair above. So we think it's a joining of two families with the figure beneath, and so it's believed that the symbol pairings are a naming system for sort of like your symbol and your father's symbol, potentially some kind of family naming system. So that the only evidence we have on the stones relates to men with that, unfortunately. We're always kind of slim pickings on more depictions of women, sadly.
Not very politically correct, Hamish.
No, it's a real shame, I'm afraid. Nothing we can do about it.
The archaeological record doesn't take sides, does it?
Sadly not.
Well, this is fascinating. A fascinating subject of study, I would say, and a data set I had absolutely no background in at all. And it sounds like it's a very robust one, and one that it could be endlessly engaging, as I say. Am I correct?
You can study these stones your entire life. There's many members of the Pictish Art Society here in Scotland that the Pictish Art Society is a wonderful society, and some of its members have been studying Pictish stones for 70 years, and some of the members, they make it their life's mission to find stones. I was part of finding one stone 2 years ago. It was somebody I knew was just cleaning an old gravestone face down in an old graveyard, flipped it over, and lo and behold, they sent me some pictures and said, I think there's a Pictish carving on that, which I confirmed, sent it to the images to the head of archaeology in Scotland, and they were there the next day getting it classed and organised to go into the local museum. It can happen very fast when people think they have a Pictish stone carving in front of them.
So to find these now is rare.
It is rare, but it's not unheard of. Some people, they search a lot of records. They go to old church grounds that they think potentially haven't been searched, or they look for old settlement sites and they can dig around and try and find them. Sometimes churches have them built into the walls, and when they are doing repair work on the church, they suddenly unearth these carved stones that at some point have been set into the walls and nobody knew about them.
Fantastic. So what would you say is your overall mission with your study of Pictish rock art?
I think it's to understand the people more. My particular study comes through recreating leatherworks. I produce replicas for museums and for study and for reenactors too. For me, I like to learn about the life of the Picts by making the items that we have and trying to use them. And that's a really lovely way to learn about the people with everyday items. And we can do the same with rock carvings by trying to understand why they are in this place and who made them. And I think just identifying with the imagery, the people that carved these stones, they left this legacy of the landscape they saw around them. Not just the physical landscape, but the political landscape, the spiritual landscape. And I think there's many, many ways to reconnect with that. And for me, it's just about trying to spread Pictish culture and kind of trying to like thin the mists of mystery that are kind of surrounding them, and just help people really connect with it, and I think honor those ancestors that are often quite forgotten. I think there's many avenues I can do that. So I kind of have my fingers in many pies to try and bring people closer to their kind of Pictish culture or heritage, you could call it, I guess.
How is this viewed by the general public? What do they think about these stones, and are they aware of them, or are they familiar with the Pictish records, and do they understand how unique and valuable and remarkable they are?
Most people are. They're aware of Pictish stones and roughly of Pictish culture. The sad thing is that I think our education of the Picts is still catching up. Most people, the general public, and even some people who study Pictish culture, they are still mired in this Victorian mindset of the Picts. They are still thought of as these naked blue barbarians clashing against the Romans. They're often really down-talked, and we have these horrific stereotypes. And people think we don't know any more than that. Whereas the last century, the last 50 years, the last 10 years has shed so much more light on all these things. Research is always ongoing, and our education is just catching up to that. So I think it's just for us that study it is to just be out in the forefront, to really say to people what you think you know about the Picts has been updated, and it's so much more fascinating than you could ever imagine.
What would you say is the most revolutionary discovery about the Picts that has come as a result of this recent scientific studies?
So up to the last 10 years, we believed we had this kind of dating system for the stone carvings. So the earliest Pictish stones, which were typically called Class 1 stones, just incised stones, were always believed to be from the 5th and 6th century. And this is generally because Victorian historians looked at them and kind of said that, and it's been propagated and never really changed. Recent studies by Gordon Noble and those at Aberdeen University have completely changed this view, from studying the sites and the stone carvings and then studying organic remains from the same sites and finding the same carvings. They were able to date a lot of the organic material and discovered that these sites were centuries earlier than believed, some of them coming out 3rd to 4th century. So that's really rocked our entire understanding of these stone carvings and when they were being erected and by who. So that's put our knowledge 2 centuries earlier than we believed. So that's very groundbreaking research.
Do archaeologists integrate the study of Pictish stones and rock art into their understandings when they publish on the archaeological studies that they are engaged in?
They do. They absolutely do. And one thing myself and others throughout the UK have been working very hard with, specifically the last decade and the last 2 decades, is for the Academic Society of Archaeology to recognise the importance of craft within that body. So before, we have a lot of academics struggling to understand the artefacts they're dealing with. So part of my job is to approach academics and give lectures on how that we can accurately replicate these findings. And by doing that, we add to the research and give more context to finds. So that has helped a lot. And there's more ongoing study of the stone carvings. I have a colleague who's currently studying pigment in the stone carvings. So that's brand new research ongoing right now to look at if the stones were painted. And it looks like they quite likely were painted in their time.
Fabulous. Well, let's break it there. Thanks, Hamish.
Sure.
See you in the flip-flop, gang. Welcome back, gang. This is segment 3 of your Rock Art Podcast, episode 135, with Hamish Findlay over in Scotland, talking about Pictish rock art. Can you imagine? This is really an amazing subject. It's got my interest, let me tell you. Hamish, so tell me a bit about, one aspect of what you're up to that really has got your interest and you feel is engaging and needs to be shared.
I think for me, it's trying to extrapolate life of the Picts from the remains we have. So with the stone carvings, what we really want to know is, what did the Picts look like? What was their style? What was their hair like? What was their clothing like? I really love trying to research into everyday people, just the mundane things that were part of their life that really make us exactly the same as them. And stone carvings and any kind of manuscripts are a beautiful way to bring this together. We have a fantastic stone in Orkney at a place called the Brow of Bursey. And on this stone, we have 3 Pictish warriors, all standing in a line. They all have neat beards and long shoulder-length hair. They have small round, square shields. They have a big spear. They have a sword on their hip, and they have long clothing that's down to their ankles, and they have shoes. So we don't know if the clothing is a tunic or if it's a coat, but it's long. It's ankle length as well. So we can see a kind of hairstyle, we can see a kind of clothing style, and we can see what weaponry they're holding. So that is one beautiful depiction. But then in an Irish tale called the House of Dasterga, there is a mention of 3 Pictish men in this Irish story. And it mentions 3 big brown men with round heads of hair on them. It says they have 3 short black cloaks around them with long hoods. They have 3 black swords, and they carry black shields with broad dark green spears above them. So it's almost describing these 3 men from this carving in Orkney.
Wow.
So we just have a really good correlation between something that was written in Ireland and a stone carving in Orkney. And that is just fascinating for me to really bring that to life. And the next step from that is to bring that to other people in any medium. So what I love doing is taking these stories or these symbols or carvings from the stones and giving them fresh life. So I might carve that into leather, which someone might buy, or with my other pursuit is tattooing. People love connecting through their culture and their art through tattoos. And it's believed the Picts were tattooed themselves. So I'm often taking these stone carvings, redrawing them, and trying to stay as true to the original artwork as I can, and let people connect with them through this body art, this way of adorning themselves. So I think it's just a beautiful way to connect with the people of that time. The Picts were no different to us, and it's really nice to honour that and really nice to connect with it in different mediums. I think that's something I'm very passionate about.
Amazing. Do we have anything about their language? Do we know about the descendants and the language that was spoken? And are there descendant languages that are related to this Pictish culture that still exist to this very day?
We do. So the Picts, initially, they spoke P-Celtic, not Q-Celtic. So Q-Celtic is Gaelic or Gaeilge in Ireland. That was spoken by the Scots in the west. The Picts spoke Chthonic P-Celtic, which is more akin to Welsh and Cornish and Breton. The closest equivalent to the Pictish language would be Welsh. And it survives in Scotland only in the place names, and we have this fantastic list of Pictish king names, and they are unlike anything we really have today, quite a lot of them. We have names like Talarcan, Drust, Gartnate, Nechten, names that really stand out in our kind of modern vocabulary.
Fabulous.
Yeah,
wow.
The language is a really interesting study in itself. You could spend a whole lifetime just on that.
I know in my own work, sometimes the language and the translations of that language are sometimes valuable in trying to understand the rock art. I know that's distant, but sometimes there's a relationship. And place names sometimes are important and can be key or somehow provide you with an understanding or a significance in association with the rock art. Have you ever found anything like that as to the names of certain, perhaps, kings?
Absolutely.
or the names of places that could be even distantly associated with the rock art?
So in the Pictish language, the word pit means a place of land. So anywhere in the east of Scotland that starts with pit is a Pictish settlement. Pitlochry, Pitmeaden, all these places. Aber is the same as a Pictish place, but we also have places like Rhynie. Rye is king. Rhynie is, the place of the king, the seat of the king. And Rhynie, when they did archaeological excavations, found out it was a royal power centre. It was the place of the king. So a lot of the time, just studying the place names leads archaeologists to it being an ancient settlement, and they can often tell which kind of settlement through the name.
Have you found a connection between a specific rock art panel, and a king or an archaeological site that has been able to be investigated, or is that too much to ask for?
That is very difficult at times, yeah. To have very, very specifics is difficult. With some exceptions, scholars will still debate for decades what's correct. But for example, we have one stone, the main Aberlemno stone, has a fantastic battle scene on it. There is no doubt about it. It is the Picts defeating the Northumbrians in battle. There are records of this happening, and from the style of the armor and the clothing, you can tell the Pictish king is triumphant with his sword, and he has a big symbol above him, and the Picts are kind of fighting in massed combat, and you can see the Northumbrians are fleeing, and they have helmets. There's no archaeological evidence the Picts had helmets, but the Northumbrians did, and we can see a raven pecking on the dead Northumbrians. So it's really interesting that stone carving can then be attributed as a monument to this battle, the battle being the Battle of Dunnikin. So we can attribute that stone to that battle, but finding the actual battlefield of Dunnikin is what still baffles scholars. There's a lot of different theories around which particular piece of land the battlefield could be at.
And we don't know exactly what kind of edifice these kings might have lived in, do we?
No, there's they certainly had hill forts and royal. We call them palaces, but royal power centres.
Okay.
They had very, very impressive hill forts. My favourite being Dundurn Hill Fort, purely because I recreate a shoe that was found there. But this was what we call a nuclear hill fort, so the entire hill was encased in walls, meters thick walls.
Wow.
Really impressive. And we actually have some evidence in Scotland of some of these hill forts being vitrified. So they have burned so fiercely that the stone has turned to glass. And we still don't know how that's even possible.
Huh. Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. Huh.
When it comes to stone carvings, there's a fantastic hill fort in the north in Murray called Burghead, and it's a big promontory hill fort. The entire town, as it is now, is built over the hill fort. It was huge, but arrayed around the walls of the hill fort were apparently 30 carved bulls, with cows being a sign of kind of currency and power in the north of Scotland. So you'd imagine this huge big promontory facing out into the ocean with these high stone walls with timber ramparts above that, with all these huge carvings of bulls all around it. It would be absolutely terrifying and a real magnificent display of power.
Very impressive. Very, very impressive. Well, as a signing off, what's the takeaway from our discussion today? What's the theme? What would you want our listeners to know and understand from your work?
I think it would be that the Picts are a very well cultured, unique, interesting culture that didn't die out. They may have amalgamated with the Scots and become Scottish and formed this country we have now. But when we study their art, it is absolutely beautiful. Their artistry and their craftsmanship was phenomenal. And only with continued study will we understand more. But we can appreciate everything that we have. We can appreciate it in all forms of art. Any stone, leather, skin, tattooing, words, poetry. It's all there to be enjoyed. And I would say to anybody that's interested to just reach out and get out and do some research and find out what's out there, because there's lots of beautiful parts of Pictish culture floating around the world today that's worth looking at.
Well, this has been absolutely astounding, Hamish. I am honored and blessed to learn about Pictish culture, Pictish rock art, and to talk with someone as scholarly and someone who's as immersed in this topic as you. And so God bless you for coming on the Rock Art Podcast. I so appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm honored. It's been a real joy. I can talk about the Picts till the cows come home. So.
Well, God bless you out there in Rock Art Podcast land.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.arcpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.